Respected senior members of INS, friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of INS, I extend my greetings to you all. I once again welcome all the members to today's webinar, the 12th in the series of talks. And as you know, through this webinar initiative, we are reaching to our members with the new developments in the varied and allied fields of nuclear science and technology. Today, we will have a talk by Dr. Shashank Chaturvedi, Director, Institute for Plasma Research. He will speak to us on deployment of technologies from plasma science, present and future. He is one of the eminent speaker on this topic, an advanced topic, no doubt. The word plasma connects us with the fusion energy, but it also has source for several spin-offs that benefits social welfare, industry, agriculture, waste disposal, and in space applications. IPR in Gandhinagar is engaged in realizing India's program on fusion through wide-ranging R&D activities and has realized several important milestones in terms of building and operating the tokamak. Dr. Shashank is going to talk on all these advanced topics for the benefit of INS members. On behalf of INS webinar subcommittee, I welcome Dr. Shashank to INS platform. And before I call him to talk, I will request Shri S.K. Mehta, our President INS, to give his opening remark.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me thank Professor Chaturvedi for accepting our invitation and talking on a subject which is very upcoming and important. Many years, the applications are there and futuristic applications are there. And in fact, I don't want to waste any time. I'm looking forward to listening to him and see what are the future applications of plasma physics is there. Welcome and thank you again.
Thank you, sir. Now I'll just introduce Dr. Shashank to our INS members. Dr. Shashank is a BTech graduate from IIT Delhi and a silver medal awardee for standing first in the department. It is a very prestigious way to start one's career, I think. He obtained his PhD in chemical engineering from Princeton University, USA. His PhD was on computational study of novel nuclear fission reactor concept. Currently, he is Director IPR at Gandhinagar. Earlier, he was in BARC Vizag Center, heading Computational Analysis Division. His interests include numerical modeling of pulsed power and plasma system, including MHD, radiation, hydrodynamics, high-speed impact and shock wave propagation, high-performance computing, theoretical and experimental studies on material properties under extreme conditions, and automated signals, voice, image, and video data processing. Under his leadership, IPR has developed several plasma technologies for application in medical sterilization, production of nanoparticles, disposal of medical waste, surface coating, and many more. Under his able leadership, IPR has developed several diagnostic systems for operation of ITER during initial phases and higher phases of operation. Under Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, IPR has conducted several programs for schools and colleges for teachers and the students in the form of regular webinar on application of plasma. Dr. Shashank is a fellow of Indian National Academy of Engineers. He is a senior professor of HBNI. For his far-reaching research in and development of technologies for ITER and for Indian Fusion Program, DAE has awarded him with Homi Bhabha Science and Technology Award. I once again welcome Dr. Shashank and request him to give his talk. We will take few questions at around 6:15, followed by a vote of thanks by Shri Malhotra. So may I request Dr. Shashank to give his talk, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Damara. Thank you, Dr. Mehta, for the kind introduction. I'll start. Can you see the presentation? Okay.
Yeah, we are able to see.
I'll be talking about deployable technologies from plasma science, both present day and plans that we have for the future. Just one slide about IPR itself. It's located in Gandhinagar, technically just outside Ahmedabad. IPR has, in the fusion program side, they're basically a four-pronged program going on in IPR. One is in the area of making tokamaks, devices called tokamaks, which are aimed at getting nuclear fusion, controlled fusion. So IPR built India's first tokamak called Aditya way back in 1989. That was followed by SST-1, a superconducting tokamak. You can see a photograph here. Aditya was then dismantled and rebuilt with many new features. It is now essentially a new machine called Aditya Upgrade. IPR is also the nodal agency for the Indian participation in the multinational ITER project, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, which is being built in France. So this is as far as building fusion devices goes. In parallel, a very critical part is developing technologies for nuclear fusion. Because if we don't develop these technologies indigenously, we are not going to get far. The third area where IPR has also made a major contribution, and which I'll be talking about today quite a bit, is developing plasma technologies for societal benefit. Finally, there's a LIGO project, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, that you might have heard about, which is still not a finally approved project, but it's in the final stages of approval, we feel. IPR will be contributing something to that, along with RRCAT, DCSEM, and IUCAA. Now, very briefly, just a quick introduction to what we mean by a plasma. There's a standard answer. Plasma is the fourth state of matter. But in reality, plasma is a lot more than just the fourth state. In fact, 99+% of the known universe is in the plasma state. Plasma is all around us. Now, plasma has many applications, things where you can use it. It has societal and industrial applications, so that means everyday life. And through nuclear fusion, once that is realized, it could become a potentially unlimited energy source. So that is why we need to understand it and then apply it. That's where the science and technology comes in. Very briefly, what is a plasma? You can just take, say, the case of water. If it's solid, it's ice. You heat it, it becomes liquid water. Heat it further, it becomes steam. That's the third state, gaseous state. Keep heating it further, you get a plasma. So it's simply the fourth state in that sense. It just has more thermal energy content compared to the other three states of matter. Now, plasma was first identified by Sir William Crookes in 1879. He didn't coin the name, he just called it radiant matter. Irving Langmuir in 1928 first gave it the name plasma. And from India, we've had major contributions to plasma science, the most notable being through Professor Meghnad Saha, who formulated the Saha equation, which tells you about the ionization state of elements. If you have a plasma at a particular temperature and density, what different ionization states will you get in there? The way Sir William Crookes produced his plasma was through an electrical discharge. So this is a simple example of what was done there. Now, what does a plasma contain? If we imagine a simple hydrogen plasma, I can make a plasma out of almost anything. If you have a hydrogen gas, it basically has a nucleus, which is a proton with an electron going around it. You heat it and give it sufficient energy by any means. You end up with a mixture of protons that are just the ions. You get free electrons, and you also have some atoms, and also maybe some molecules, depending on the temperature. This mixture of free electrons and ions and molecules and neutrals is what you call a plasma. The thing to remember is plasmas macroscopically are electrically neutral. The number of negative and positive charges basically balance out. So there's no difference there. And the material will remain in the plasma state as long as you keep providing energy to balance energy losses. Keep pouring in energy, it stays a plasma. One thing that needs to be distinguished when we talk of the fourth state of matter, it's not simply just one more state. It's the enormous range of parameters that you have in a plasma. If you look at this plot, on the y-axis, you have temperature. Plasma exists over temperatures ranging from a few thousand degrees all the way to hundreds of millions of degrees. And in terms of material density, normally when we talk of density in plasmas, typically one doesn't refer to it in terms of grams per cc, you call it particles per cc. So you look at the x-axis, you see the range of densities, orders of magnitude of density, which is covered by plasma. So you have things like aurora, the northern lights, that has plasma, even a flame has some plasma. Neon signs, fluorescent lights have plasmas, solar corona, lightning. magnetic fusion, which is what the method that's been most successful in trying to get to fusion, the core of the sun, thermonuclear weapons, and finally inertial fusion. So it's orders of magnitude, density, and temperature. And it's this mixture of different materials, different temperatures, and different densities that give rise to very different properties in plasmas. So if you think of mankind has created several kinds of plasma and put them to use. There are spacecraft propulsion systems, things called plasma thrusters, which are used in space. You have tokamaks that I'll be talking about. There are things called dusty plasmas, where you have a plasma in which you have small dust particles, nanoparticles are dispersed, which behaves in a very different way. There are electrical sparks, you have welding, plasma torches, plasma discharge tubes. There are plasmas used for industrial applications like plasma nitriding, and so on. So it's a very wide range of things there where you can use plasmas. And the reason is you can make a plasma out of different materials, you can put it at different temperature, different densities, and they behave in a very different way. Now, quickly, some ways of producing a plasma. The simplest is just pour some energy into it, heat it. So you can have something like a burner, because you've got chemical energy release there, it produces a small amount of plasma. It's called a weakly ionized plasma. You can have an electric spark, just put 2 electrodes, apply high voltage between them, you get a spark, that has a plasma. You can have a laser, so you have optical energy, shine it on a solid target, you get pulse plasmas produced through lasers. And finally, you can have microwave plasmas, for example, using electromagnetic energy. So you can see a discharge being produced purely by microwaves inside a gas. Okay, now let me start coming to the actual application. So this was like a kind of background to plasmas. If you come to fusion systems and technologies, I'll talk about that first and then come to the societal applications of plasmas. Now, the basic difference, as most of you would know, is the sun produces energy using fusion of protons, just normal hydrogen. But the reaction between protons to produce an alpha particle is very, very slow. The sun can afford to do it because it has a lot of atoms. So even a small reaction rate per kilo, let's say, still gives it a lot of energy output. When we do it on Earth, we are dealing with much smaller masses. So we use 2 isotopes, deuterium and tritium. So if you can produce fusion of D and T, you get a helium nucleus, alpha particle, and a neutron. 80% of the energy goes into the neutron, 20% comes into the helium nucleus. Now, to produce this kind of fusion, basically because you've got charged particles and the cross-section for a fusion reaction between D and T is really very small. So if you try to bring 2 DT, a D and a T together, most likely they're just going to scatter because of Coulomb forces. So since the cross-section is very low, you need to take it to give them very high energy, something like 100 keV. That means you have to, so to overcome that force, you could either use beams of particles or you could just heat it to a higher temperature. What has been found practically is, if you take beams of particles, let's say a beam of neutrons and a beam of protons, they don't fuse very well with each other. There are instabilities which come up. It doesn't exist as a beam anymore. So the most successful way that people have found is simply take a deuterium tritium gas and heat it to a high enough temperature. Okay, so the problem is that to get to this kind of fusion conditions, you need to produce temperatures around 100 million degrees, about 10 crore degrees, about 10 times higher than the temperature at the center of the sun. The problem is a hot plasma like this is very energetic. It does not like to be confined. Let me just play a video which I downloaded from YouTube. It shows you what the sun does. This is taken from YouTube. As you know, the surface of the sun, it's not something that is quiet. It's perpetually in a state of motion. There are wave instabilities going on all the time. They have such solar flares. There are things called coronal mass ejections. Many of them affect the Earth. So even the sun, which has such a massive gravity, is not able to hold the plasma in. So that's a very fundamental thing you have to remember about plasmas. The first problem is you have to create a hot plasma. Second is the plasma doesn't like to be kept there. You have to keep it away from the cold surroundings. So you have to find a way to confine it. The third is you need to control it so that it behaves the way you want. This is where all the technology problems come in. Now, the way the sun does it just has a huge amount of gravity, so it tries to keep in the material. There's another approach to fusion, an alternate approach, which is using intense particle beams or intense lasers, which is called inertial confinement. The one that's been the most successful so far and the one being pursued in IPR and in the ITER program is using what is called magnetic confinement. So what you do is you put a very strong magnetic field. Now, because the particles in a plasma are charged, you have electrons and ions. Charged particles experience a force and a magnetic field. You have Q into V cross B. As long as the particle tries to move along the field, it has no trouble. If it tries to move across the field, tries to escape from the field, it experiences a force, and that's how you get cyclotron motion. So magnetic confinement is the basis which has led of devices which have been the most successful. Now the problem is to produce the conditions, to produce the magnetic field, a magnetic cage which will hold the plasma, then heat up the plasma. Then the plasma keeps losing energy all the time at a high rate. You have to evacuate that heat in a safe way. You put all these problems together, which probably make fusion research the most challenging technological task today, anywhere in the world. There are many systems, different things within the space program or elsewhere, which involve 1 or 2 technologies or 3 technologies. Fusion is the only one that requires all these technologies all put together. And I'll give you an example of that. So firstly, how do I heat a plasma? What you do is to pass a strong electrical current in the DT gas. You're talking of currents of millions of amperes, typically millions or even tens of millions of amperes. Once you've created a plasma, you continue heating it using powerful electromagnetic waves. In a machine like ITER, we are talking of power in electromagnetic waves in the range of tens of megawatts, continuous. So you're talking of tens of megawatts continuous wave RF sources. Another way of heating the plasma is to inject high energy neutral particles. Again, we are talking of energies of something like 1 MeV and currents. Now, 1 MeV energies are no big deal. You know, the accelerators which produce particles at much higher energies, they go up to GeV and beyond. The difference here is we need only 1 MeV, but we need massive currents to heat the plasma. We need currents of something like tens of amperes or even 100 amperes. So it's enormous amounts of power at high voltages. So by combining all these different things, by passing a large current, by using high electromagnetic waves and particle beams, you can reach a temperature of about 100 million degrees. The next problem is holding it inside. You use what is called a magnetic cage. I won't go into detail. Basically, it's a bunch of electromagnets of different types that you do it. The magnetic fields we are talking about here are something like in ITER, for example, it's in the range of about 5 Tesla. To put that in perspective, the Earth's magnetic field is 0.3 Gauss, which is 10,000 Gauss is 1 Tesla, and we are talking of 50,000 Gauss. And that's just the field inside the plasma. There are other concepts which would require even higher magnetic fields. So it requires very powerful electromagnets. Okay, so this is just giving you a picture of what you have in ITER. There's a central solenoid, which is 13 meters high, weighs about 1,000 tons. There are 18 toroidal field coils, different kinds of magnetic field, 17 meters high, weigh 360 tons each. And then the 6 poloidal field coils, 8 to 24 meters in diameter, each of them weighing 200 to 400 tons. So you need a very big set of electromagnets which produce a very strong magnetic field to confine the plasma. So the first problem was heating the plasma. The second was having a magnetic cage, which is tough enough. One thing to remember is all this stuff has to be done at steady state because you want to produce power from fusion. So all this plasma has to be held at steady state. That means my electromagnets, my 5 Tesla magnetic field has to be maintained continuously. Now, the common way to produce magnetic fields is using solenoids made of copper, aluminum, whatever. The trouble is, if you try to produce such high fields continuously in copper, there's a lot of Joule heating of the copper. You have I square R, there's a large current flowing inside a resistance, so you get a lot of heating. The power you would dissipate in the copper would be far more than what you would get out of the fusion machine. So you cannot use copper magnets, you have to come to superconducting magnets. That brings in a whole new class of problem. You need superconducting magnets of this size. And to make the material superconducting, you need very large cryo plants because the superconducting magnets have to be cooled to 4 degrees Kelvin, absolute. That's minus 269 degrees. So just to summarize, the technologies that are there in tokamaks that are required, you need cryogenics and superconductivity, superconducting magnets. Again, they're almost cutting edge technology there. You need beam technologies. The plasma you cannot put anything into such a hot plasma. So there's a whole series of diagnostics which measure what is coming out of the plasma. They measure the spectral emission coming right from hard X-rays to soft X-rays to ultraviolet to visible to millimeter waves. You monitor the entire spectrum of radiation coming out, even even particles coming out, and try to figure out what's happening inside. You need RF and microwave technologies. To drive all these systems, you need very powerful power supplies. In fact, a large part of the cost of fusion machines, of tokamak fusion machines, goes into the power supplies. So these are high voltage, high current regulated power supplies. Then you need advanced materials for the blanket, for the plasma fissing components and so on. And finally, to put it all together, manufacturing techniques, because all of it has to be done with great precision. Just to give a rough idea of the kind of thing that has been done, what you're seeing on the top left is a cross-sectional view of the Joint European Torus, the jet machine in the UK. In 1996, it demonstrated for a few seconds 16 megawatts of fusion power output. Now, jet itself cannot be scaled up to a fusion reactor. It would never produce more fusion power than you put into it. So you have to build a much bigger machine called ITER. The figure here shows the relative size of jet and ITER. You can see quite a large difference. So in terms of technology and in terms of size, it's a much bigger thing altogether. On the right bottom is a picture of the ITER site in France. It's at a place, it's near Marseille in France, southern France. Okay, just a quick summary of the progress there's been in control fusion. On the y-axis, you see the central ion temperature. Remember, you have to get to temperatures of 100 million degrees or 100 to 200 million degrees. And on the x-axis, you have a different figure of merit called the fusion triple product. I won't go into details of what that means. When the tokamak concept was first developed by the Russians back in the 60s, it was out here, very low. Then in the first generation, 1970s, then you had the second generation in the 1980s, the third generation, 1990 to 2000, and finally ITER, which is out here. So you can see there's been orders of magnitude improvement, both in the fusion triple product, that's the product of the density of the plasma, the time for which you hold it, for which the plasma keeps in the heat, and the temperature of the plasma. And on the y-axis, you can see the temperature rising. So it's been a very sustained program through lots of fusion devices being built around the world. Okay, now let's come to what India has been doing in this. The Indian in-kind effort, a large part of the Indian contribution there is in-kind. We make the subsystems in India and deliver them there. And that is how all the 7 partners are operating. The 7 partners are basically India, Russia, China, South Korea, Japan, Russia, the European Union as a single entity, and the US. It's a matter of pride for all of us that the Indian in-kind commitments have so far been completed as according to schedule. There's nothing where we are running behind schedule. So it's a national effort with a major effort and participation from the entire DAE family, as well as Indian industry. Something we can all be proud of. Let me just show a video which will give you an idea of the kinds of things we've been delivering and the ones which we are going to deliver. So there's the ITER machine. There's a standard 2-meter human being standing at the bottom right, if you can see that. India has contributed the cryostat. It's a vessel, it's a vacuum vessel, 3,800 tons, compatible with ultra high vacuums. It's been built in sections at L&T Hazira and sent in pieces to France, where it has been put together by welding at the ITER site workshop. Indian industries have been building the in-wall shield, which provides neutron shielding and also modifies the magnetic field. It's being done at Afsarla Technologies Bangalore and L&T. Then we have RF systems. We are providing a large part of the ion cyclotron heating systems, tetrode-based and diachrode-based. We are providing the cooling water system. Most of it is complete now and delivered at the ITER site, L&T Chennai and Kirloskar, Pune. The cryo distribution, I told you that you need liquid helium to cool the superconducting magnets. We are providing the cryo lines and the cryo distribution there at the ITER site. The stuff that carries, the piping that carries it from the cryo plant, which is far away, to the machine itself. In terms of power supplies, we are making the acceleration grid power supplies, regulated high voltage power supplies. We are building a neutral beam, a diagnostic neutral beam, which is again a first of a kind. Multiple industries in India are involved in that. Several diagnostics for measuring what's happening inside the plasma. So this gives you just a feel for the kinds of things we are doing. Let me now come to the systems. These are things that we are delivering in kind from India to ITER. But since India is basically doing 1/9 of the entire job, 9% of the entire job, in addition to these, there are systems being developed in India, which are not being delivered to ITER because we need to develop all those technologies indigenously. I don't have time to go into each of these. What I'll give you is a flavor of some of them, some of the technologies and where we've reached. The first part is, I told you that in ITER, we'll be pouring a huge amount of power into the plasma continuously. So something like tens of megawatts going in. When you pour in that power, the plasma also tends to lose heat. It's very, very hot and to some extent it's leaky. Even though we have a magnetic cage, the energy tends to leak out. So finally that heat has to be received in a controlled manner on a surface called a diverter. The diverter receives a heat flux of 10 megawatts per meter square. This is comparable with what we have on a missile during re-entry. So you know that in the space program and in the missile program, there's a lot of effort that went into developing tiles which are mounted on the surface so that when there's re-entry into the atmosphere, those tiles ablate and they blow away. Unfortunately, that technology can't be used in a tokamak, because if you have ablative tiles inside a tokamak, all the dirt coming out, the carbon or whatever material the tiles are made of, will come and corrupt the plasma. They dirty the plasma. So we need to build a diverter which can take 10 megawatts per meter square and for short times 100 megawatts per meter square without ablating. So it requires special materials, special joining technologies, and cooling. We have a test facility at IPR where we develop different kinds of these mock-ups for the diverter and test them out. I'll just show you a video of the test facility, which is called the high heat flux test facility. It uses an electron beam. You can now see the electron beam shining on a target that can produce pulsed and steady state loads. You can see the glow on the target. We can do rastering of the electron beam. We can do pulsing with it. We have diagnostics, variety of diagnostics by infrared cameras and so on, by which we can monitor the temperature distribution. Now, on top of this, recently we just started setting up an experimental high pressure helium cooling loop. Currently, in this high flux test facility, the diverter mock-ups, which we load, are cooled with water. We are now setting up another facility which will provide high pressure cooling loops using helium. So at about 80 bar pressure. So we'll be able to do study different kinds of cooling, either using helium cooling or water. Another area in which we have developed our own technology for our own program, and now we also supplying to others, is developing cryosorption cryopumps. Tokamak machines, they have to operate at ultra high vacuum. We have to go down to a base pressure of around 10 to the minus 8 millibar. Before you start filling in hydrogen, it has to be very pure, because impure plasma tends to radiate most of the energy away. Now, to produce that ultra high vacuum, generally India imports cryopump, different kinds of vacuum pumps like turbomolecular pumps and so on. We have developed cryosorption cryopumps, 100% made in India. So it's all designed, fabricated in India. As you can see, a series of the steps that are undergone in setting it up and then using it. Incidentally, it's not just for our own requirements. We were able to supply, there was a requirement at the Space Application Center of ISRO in Ahmedabad. We've developed cryopumps for them for their cryovac chambers where satellites get tested, and it satisfied their requirements. So now we've supplied 3 of them for regular use there. And there we've got inquiries from other agencies who also require these indigenous cryopumps. Let me come to another part. Tokamaks, as you can see roughly, you might have seen a cross section of the torus. It's a very complex geometry. In the first place, the torus itself is complicated because it's an irregular shape. You have access to the torus only from certain ports. There are small openings in it through which you can access it. Now, every once in a while, the plasma facing components, the components that's actually in contact with the plasma, they are subjected to very high heat fluxes and to high temperatures. So there can be a problem, let's say, of a water leak somewhere, or the tile might get damaged, or there are antennas sitting inside which might need to be replaced. We need a method for doing remote inspection and remote repair of components or remote replacement. So we have a separate program at IPR for developing both remote handling equipment, which can work inside a tokamak, and for doing in-vessel inspection. What will the in-vessel inspection do? What's special about it? You can see at the bottom left, you've seen a top cross-sectional view of the torus. We have an in-vessel inspection system that will actually go inside the torus It is an articulated arm with multiple degrees of freedom, and there would be a camera mounted on it. The camera would show us exactly what is happening inside. So this is the way we would inspect what is happening inside. Later, we are also separately developing something that will allow us to take out tiles, identify defective tiles, and replace them. Let me show you how this is working. We got this in-vessel inspection system recently commissioned, tested, it's delivered. It's a 6 degree of freedom articulated system. It has a maximum, you can have a payload of up to 1 kilogram camera or something else, a 4 meter reach inside the machine. There are 5 revolute joints and 1 translation stage in that. A virtual reality system, a virtual reality facility, which is separate. The two things are integrated now. So you can monitor the behavior remotely over a high-speed network. Remember that the tokamak operates at ultra-high vacuum. We need to be able to do the inspection while it's still under vacuum. We cannot open up the vacuum each time we want to check something. So this entire in-vessel inspection system is ultra-high vacuum compatible. It uses UHV compatible motors with gearboxes, absolute encoders, their cables and hybrid bearings. And it can operate up to 100 degrees because a tokamak has to be baked at high temperature. So we need to be compatible with ultra-high vacuum at 10 to the minus 7 millibar and be able to handle up to 100 degrees temperature. At a 4 meter reach, we've been able to get a position repeatability of 0.2 millimeters. Let me just show you a demonstration of the simulation and actual performance, which we obtained just last week. Sorry. On the left, you'll see an animation, a VR animation of how we want the articulated arm to move. On the right, you see the actual performance of the in-vessel inspection system. We have done this, of course, outside because once you put it inside the torus, you can't see anything. The video is not very good because we took it with a mobile phone, but it just shows you the capability of the thing. And pretty soon it's going to be integrated with a virtual reality system, which is a separate facility. So you'll be able to program right from the beginning. You'll have a full 3D model of the tokamak, prescribe exactly where you want to go, and this thing will automatically calculate what kind of deflections you should have, what kind of linear motion, angular motion you should have to reach that point. Let me come to another thing. Another thing which partly requires the same kind of in-vessel inspection. We have a system for imaging based on wound imaging fiber bundles for harsh environments. This is a non-invasive diagnostic for tokamaks. The problem we have is we cannot directly put cameras inside very close to a tokamak, very close to the vacuum vessel, because the magnetic field is very high. It's a few Tesla. Cameras tend to, they don't perform well there. So what we do is we build a system based on a coherent wound imaging fiber bundle. It has a lens, an imaging lens. It then transports the image of the plasma from the inside of the machine to the low field region outside the machine. You go outside the magnets. And there you can then put a normal CCD camera and image. So this is a picture on the left, bottom left, you have a coherent, the fiber bundle itself. On the right, you see pictures taken, a high-speed video taken of plasma evolution inside the SST1 tokamak. Incidentally, this is what we actually did this for our tokamak applications, but then it turned out there was a requirement from BARC for the waste management division. So we were able to do something for them also. There was a requirement of remote video monitoring of a hot cell. Now the hot cell has a 1.5 meter thick RCC wall containing very active material. If you have direct viewing of that, putting a camera right on that, in just 1 or 2 days, the radiation damages it. What we did was to develop a similar system for WMD, also with some software inside it, so that it eliminates some false honeycombs that were resulting. This is a video of what was obtained during testing inside a hot cell. So here, all that gets damaged is the imaging lens and the fiber, which you can easily replace. That's the low-cost material. But the camera itself remains intact. So this is a video that came out from actual testing on the hot cell. Now, one thing that we are working on, and we are hoping maybe in a month or two, we'll be able to deliver. This current camera imaging system that is mounted in WMD and on SST, it cannot be moved. So you just see a still picture. The camera is just monitoring one line of sight. But occasionally you would like to see what's happening in other parts. So what we are doing is to I'll show you an animation of the system we are making, which will allow us to have pan and zoom and tilt inside that. So it's again an application of the in-vessel inspection system adapted to a hot cell. You'll see how it's going to perform in this animation. The interesting part is this uses linear actuators. So there's nothing, you don't have anything like gears or motors which would get damaged by radiation. This is the thing that have to be mounted on the hot cell. So all the gears, all the motors are sitting outside. They don't get damaged. And we'll be able to move this thing right in front where the fiber bundle is located. So this will allow us, when this is deployed, it will allow us to view both inside the SST1 machine and in WMD with much greater flexibility. Okay. Let me now come to another part, that is neutronics. A fusion machine is going to produce 14 MeV neutrons. Now, it is difficult to generate 14 MeV neutrons, and they are much more damaging in terms of the DPA as compared to fission neutrons. You can get damage in the range of 100 to 200 DPA in fusion reactor components. So we needed at least a simple facility, some facility where you can produce 14 MeV neutrons, and we can start learning how to develop diagnostics for these things, check our neutronics calculations using MCNP or whatever. We've recently set up a 14 MeV DT neutron generator at IPR. This is just a picture of the setup. It's an accelerator-based facility. Just to put that in perspective, if we compare with other fusion neutron sources, in China, for example, they have something which can produce 10 to the 14 neutrons per second. From 2016, it's been operating at a rate of 10 to the 12, but they can go up to 10 to the 14. Similarly, in Japan, they're developing much bigger facilities, but they're still under development, but 10 to the 15 or 10 to the 16 neutrons per second. Our facility is 5 to 8, 10 to the 12 neutrons per second. We've already done, because we already had site clearance from AERB, we've set it up, we've tested it. I'll show you test results now, which we got just 2 weeks back. So there's a hot result. Out of a beam energy of 300 keV design value, we've already achieved 206 keV. We did the trial run for neutron production. 20 milliamps is the beam current. We've reached 6 because we can't actually go to the full one, start producing too many neutrons. The tritium target, we are using a small tritiated target made on a titanium trichide. They are helium-3 neutron detectors. The maximum neutron yield expected is around 510 to the 12 neutrons per second. We are already getting 710 to the 11 neutrons per second. So this is like a test run. Now, once we get AERB clearance, we'll be going for try to go to the full strength of this thing. Let me come to another one, and a very different application, which is a very good example of collaboration between BIRC and IPR. There's an electromagnetic pellet accelerator, electromagnetic acceleration facility, which is developed at BIRC, Vizag by CAD. Now, this is what it roughly looks like in the lab. You basically have a bunch of solenoids through which you discharge a pulse current using capacitor banks. And there's a projectile inside, a hollow cylindrical projectile. There are eddy currents induced in it, which therefore it experiences electromagnetic force and accelerates. What we did was, in the application in Vizag was just to accelerate the projectile by itself. And that was, there was some application there. In IPR, what we wanted was to put in different pellets of different sizes and different materials at high speed, a speed of around 200 meters per second into the tokamak. So we modified it. The facility, the system in Vizag was set up to use at atmospheric pressure. Interface was developed jointly between the Vizag group and the group at IPR. It was made UHV compatible. It was tested. This is a high-speed camera image. You can see the powder being accelerated. These are very small pellets, or they can be, we can accelerate pellets, so we can accelerate powder. And we then did, for the first time in the world, we've actually used this electromagnetic acceleration to inject these pellets into a tokamak. Nobody has ever done it before. So this was done into an Aditya upgrade tokamak. What you're seeing is a high-speed video of the Aditya tokamak machine. Tokamak plasmas, because they are hot, they're not luminous. The only part that is luminous is the part in contact with the solid surfaces, the torus. You'll see the pellet appearing shortly. That will be luminous. Yeah, now you can see the pellet coming in from the right, a big pellet and a small one. Then it ablates. There's a flash because it turns into plasma and radiates enormously. So this is the first known demonstration of electromagnetic pellet injection into a tokamak anywhere in the world. And an even better thing is it's a collaboration between two very different teams. Okay, now so far I've been talking about giving you a feel for the tokamak machines that we've got. We've got the Aditya tokamak working, the SST1 tokamak working, and of course our contribution to ITER. I've also talked about some of the fusion technologies that are developing. This is not everything that's being done, but in 1 hour, I can't actually cover everything. I'd now like to cover another different area totally. Now, like I said in the beginning, plasmas vary enormously in terms of the composition, the temperature, and the pressure. And you can also have very different, so different combinations of material, temperature, and pressure can lead to very different applications. So IPR has developed three different kinds of technologies. There's some mature technologies where we have taken patents and we've transferred technology to industry for commercialization. There's some which are at what you can call the technology demonstrator level, and the third which are at the R&D stage. I'll just give you a feel for some of these things. The idea is not to make it comprehensive, just to give a general feel. Now, plasmas around the world, they're used for a very wide range of things. So sometimes this is the thing we have to be cautious about. We should not confuse plasma science and technology with fusion science technology. Fusion is one line, but there are lots of low temperature plasma applications all around the world, which are already deployed and which can be deployed. Let me just, so they cover areas like the energy sector, industrial, the strategic sectors, societal and health, and environment. And I'll just give you a feel for some of these. It's interesting that Professor Ramamurthy is in the part of the audience today. He initiated a program when he was Secretary DS. There was something, a program started in high temperature plasma torches, plasma pyrolysis, plasma torches, and so on. And that has led to a whole range of applications. Now, these plasma torches, plasma arcs, they can be used for waste disposal, biomedical waste, hazardous chlorinated waste, and so on. You can also use them for energy recovery, what is called waste to energy. So if you have something like a mixture of municipal solid waste and high calorie waste, like scrap tires, plastics, and so on, you can not only get rid of the waste, you can also get some energy back from it. These also have applications in metallurgy and other applications. You can produce nanopowders. You can use it for alumina spheroidization. You can change the shapes of particles, dissociation, zircon, sand, and so on. So there's a whole range of green technologies coming out of just one plasma application. There's plasma torches. So there's a whole range of waste streams that can be handled by these things. So I'm just showing you pictures like tires and so on. Now, plasma pyrolysis and gasification systems, you're seeing pictures here. We had a 0.4 ton per day capacity plasma system for biomedical waste disposal. It was inspected by CPCB. It was based on IPR's effort and interaction that CPCB, the Central Pollution Control Board, issued a gazette notification saying that plasma pyrolysis is now a certified technology for biomedical waste disposal. Then there's an existing 1 ton per day plasma waste disposal system at IPR in one of our centers, which is there where we keep trying to improve the technology. There's some examples of technology transfers that we've done. For plasma pyrolysis, we've transferred to 4 partners: plasma nitriding systems, to 2 nanopowder production, Angora volt treatment, making textiles and thin polymer films, plasma treatment there, pencil plasma jets, 1 vendor, and plasma activated water to 1 vendor. Now I'll just show you pictures and videos of some of these technologies. We are also developing a 5 ton per day plasma pyrolysis system for biomedical waste for the Homi Bhabha Cancer Hospital that's coming up in Varanasi. We are hoping that by the end of 2022, we'll have the system under testing at IPR. Once that's fully commissioned, we'll actually shift it to Varanasi. You can produce nanopowders. Thermal plasmas can produce nanopowders like metals or oxides or nitrides. We have developed up to a 1 kg per day capacity plant and transferred technology to a local party who actually produces it. So they're producing things like zinc oxide and titanium nanopowders, which have industrial applications. There was a requirement from some industry, Carborundum Universal. They had alumina powder, which they wanted to make as spherical as possible. So you can do in-flight spheroidization using plasmas. That system was made for them. Dissociation of zircon sand can be done. That's been done for a particular vendor. Calcination of limestone. You can do expanded graphite production. That's used in a lot of things like oil adsorbents, gaskets, seals, and so on. So these are all industry-driven technology development projects, industry-driven, industry-funded. There was a project on phosphorus recovery from phosphoric acid, and so on. Let me now come to something that we have started. We started this just about 1 year back, and we've already had interest from one industry. Now, you know that in coal-fired power plants, there are 2 problems that normally happen. One is if a burner gets extinguished, it takes quite a few hours. It takes 3 to 4 hours, maybe even 5 hours to restart the burner. The reason is that coal, especially Indian coal, the volatile content is very low. There's a lot of ash. So you have to heat it to a fairly high temperature before the volatiles come out into the gaseous phase and start burning. Using a plasma device, which is attached to these things, to these burners, can give you a startup in a matter of minutes instead of hours. The second is another problem that coal-fired plants are facing now is because of solar power. In the day, solar power sources are very strong, they contribute, but at night it starts going down. So they have to, sometimes in the daytime, they have to come down to as low as 50 or 60% of the design capacity. Burners tend to get extinguished if you go down to too low a load factor. Again, using plasmas, people abroad have shown that you can operate at low load factor, low capacity in existing burners. So these are like retrofitting on existing burners. Basically what happens is you attach a chamber, a plasma device, where you have a plasma arc, a plasma torch. When you have coal particles of a size of 50 to 100 microns, they enter the plasma zone, there's a thermal shock. They break down into particles of 5 to 10 microns. So clearly you get more surface area. That's the first benefit that you get out of that. The second is because you have a lot of surface area and high temperature from the plasma, the volatiles come out. The volatiles evaporate. Now you have a mixture of all the volatiles with air, which then burns much more easily. So we've done trials. We've got a small prototype system set up at IPR. This is just an example of that. This is a feeder. This was done for a very low capacity system because it was like an R&D kind of thing to check if we could do it. This is where the coal is fed. Then you have air and coal fed in. There's a graphite electrode which strikes the plasma arc. The volatiles come here, the mixture of volatiles and coal particles and gases, and of course ash, and then it comes out here and burns. Just show you a video of what it looks like inside. So the very hot region is the plasma arc itself. So by adding a small amount of electrical power, you can actually get much more amplification. That is, most of the energy comes from coal combustion itself, but you are just facilitating it using the plasma arc. Okay. We also have computer simulations of these things as part of something else. It was really a spin-off. We were doing a project for DRDO on something called a pulse detonation engine. As part of that, we developed capability for 3D CFD simulations of combustion. So that same capability is now coming in handy. And we have a private party that we interacted with just last week who are interested in simulations. If you have a plasma burner igniter like this attached to a coal burner, how will it perform? They want overall studies. So this is the kind of information that you can get from those CFD simulations coupled with combustion, exothermic reactions. What you're seeing is the pressure development inside on a color scale. But in this particular case, in these pulse detonation engines, the pressure goes to around 20 bar. Okay. Let me come to a very different application, that's plasma technology for textiles and woolens. We've developed an atmospheric pressure plasma systems for wool treatment. Now, normally you might be aware that Angora wool, which is otherwise very warm, you cannot make 100% Angora fabric. That's because the coefficient of friction is very low. Using by creating a nanopattern on the wool fiber using plasmas, it improves the interfiber cohesion. So you can make 100% Angora fabric. And we've supplied one such system to the Kulu Weavers Society. You can see pictures here, the untreated Angora and then the plasma treated. What you have a very small discharges called dielectric barrier discharges, which are used for this. Another application, again for the textile industry, you know that denim fading is something that is very important, especially for young people. They're very interested in fading or getting certain patterns made on their denim jeans, for example. Normally people use laser fading for that, but that's expensive. We have a plasma system where you can draw any shape on a PC, and a plasma jet produces the same pattern on denim. It's a much lower cost system compared to a laser system. Okay. We've also made something called an inline textile treatment, inline plasma treatment system, which has been supplied to Mantra. There's a man-made textile research association in Surat, which has a textile industry people as members. This is being used for generating data, checking the techno-commercial feasibility. The basic point is this: in many fabrics, it is not easy to use natural dyes because the natural dye uptake doesn't happen. This is because of adhesion properties. The surface tension properties have to be modified. Using plasma treatment, you can actually modify the surface properties of the textile without changing anything else. It then starts taking up natural dyes. You don't need to use chemical solvents. So it's basically an eco-friendly thing. You avoid the use of chemical solvents, which otherwise would be a waste. We just show you a video. It's a full-scale inline textile treatment system. Okay. Let's look at some other applications. You can increase the lifetime of industrial components using a process called plasma nitriding. Now, you're already aware of gas nitriding. The disadvantage with gas nitriding is that you have to heat the component to a certain temperature. In temperature sensitive components, that can cause distortions, they change dimensions, which are not very nice. Also, plasma nitriding gives you a higher case depth. So the overall lifetime increases. And you get very uniform case depth around the component. This just, I'll show you a video showing the, So this is the component, in this case, just a spherical ball, which is immersed inside a glow discharge plasma. So by doing that, you get a very uniform coverage of nitriding on the entire surface. This has a lot of applications. We even have a job shop running an IPR in one of our industrial application centers. So different components are sent there by industry. We are now in the process of developing a bigger system, which can be deployed either in the job shop, or maybe it can be, we work out some arrangement with the private sector for use of a bigger nitriding system for large components. In fact, a lot of the gears that were used in the INSAT series of satellites, they were nitrided at IPR. You can use plasmas to produce coatings of different types. So, example, there was one requirement from ISRO where they wanted to make a lightweight antenna for microwaves. We managed that by taking Lexan and producing a very thin coating, just 8 microns copper coating. So it produced a lightweight antenna. There's another application of plasma coatings in the biomedical field. You know that you have this ball and socket joint at the hip, and sometimes people have accidents and they damage that thing. The ball has to be replaced. The standard way, the earlier way was to use SS316L walls or something, but they tend to get corroded very fast when you put them inside body fluids. Using plasma coatings, you can make multi-layer coatings of titanium and titanium nitride or something else. And that tends to increase the lifetime. It makes it more corrosion resistant. These are now being tried out. It's a collaborative work with CGCRI in Calcutta. They're testing how well this performs, how much the lifetime increases inside the same kind of loading conditions that you would have. During the COVID period, plasmas, because they have a lot of reactive species, plasma are basically discharges. I told you they have multiple species. So if I have a plasma discharge in air, I can produce things like multiple species out of nitrogen and oxygen and mixtures of those things. These excited species and ions, they can have antiviral and antibacterial action. So during the first COVID lockdown, we entered into an MOU with an agency called CCAMP in Bengaluru. We've made a plasma jet sterilizer, which is a handheld sterilizer, which can be used for sterilizing surfaces. And it's a portable thing. You can carry it around. You can drive it with battery also. It's been tested against COVID at CCMB Hyderabad for different kinds of, for COVID and against different bacteria and so on. It's been doing a pretty decent job. So now we are working with CCAMP and an industrial partner to see if we can commercialize it. Not just for a handheld sterilizer, which will be used for clearing surfaces. We're also seeing whether it can be made as part of an air purifier. If it can be, for example, put into, made a part of an air conditioner. So we've tried to make it compact and complying with other industrial requirements. If it works, it's being tested now. If it works out, it could be a nice indigenous product going into air conditioners to eliminate viral loads. We also found that this thing works very well, not just by removing out particular kinds of materials. It can inactivate viruses on polymer sheets, nano-coated paper, leather sheets, different kinds of materials. So this is all tested at CCMB. We have also developed a plasma jet for biomedical applications. Now, normally people tend to think of plasmas as hot, but there are also things called cold plasmas. I'll just show you a video of these. It's called a pencil jet. It's a very small thing. You can shine it on your finger. Nothing happens. You just feel some gas flow. The nice part is, this is again based on something called a dielectric barrier discharge. It again has multiple applications. For example, we can make these very small. We have made these plasma jets so small that they can go inside your vein. So even for intravenous applications, it could be made. Now, one of the applications amongst many is it can help in blood coagulation, which is faster. So basically, if you have bleeding somewhere, we've done testing at a pathology lab here. Natural coagulation of blood can take up to about 3 minutes. Using artificial coagulation agents, you can bring it down to 20 seconds or so. With plasma treatment with a jet like this, it can come down to 12 seconds. So we're still trying to understand the mechanism there, but we're trying to see whether this could become something which could be used by, say, first responders. If you have an accident or something like that, can they use it to stop bleeding? Of course, what you would have to study in these things is any adverse effects. So it has to be done in association with medical research centers. In IPR, we have a lot of work going on with different medical research centers. We are working with the Department of Neurology at AIIMS. We are working with the ACTREC, part of TMC in Bombay, and lots of other medical research centers who test out our devices to see under medical conditions, because they have the ability and the certification to do these tests. The applications, for example, for dental applications, you can use it if you have a root canal treatment. For sterilization, or after you drill the hole in the tooth, sterilization, these plasma jets could be very useful. So that's being tested. We have one medical research center testing it out. These are all collaborations with the multiple agencies. We've also used plasmas to make sensors, very small sensors, which could detect very low level of impurities. Let's take one example like melamine. You know that there are people who use melamine, they add it to milk, and that's a very harmful thing. It can even lead to death in children and so on. Now, there are many ways of detecting these chemicals. You can have gas chromatography, liquid chromatography. There's a whole range of things that people can use. And each of them has its own threshold, the level at which it can detect these impurities. What we found is, using plasmas, we can produce nano patterns or nanoparticle arrays on different sensors. We can make it even on paper or on some other materials. These sensors, these substrates which are made, each one, right now the cost is something like 50 rupees to us. You then use a handheld Raman spectrometer, which comes for around 12 lakhs or so. So in the field, you could do testing of samples and detect chemicals as low as 10 nanomolar concentrations. That is what we are able to do. So it's basically a question of being able to detect very low concentrations of chemicals, harmful chemicals in the field. It could offer an option there. We also developed something called plasma activated water. Well, what is it? Let me just show you a video. It's a plasma jet that I talked about, which is made to interact with water in a beaker or something. What's the great thing about it? You get a lot of reactive oxygen nitrogen species forming inside the water. And these typically last for a few hours to a few days. We made it at a very low cost, and we can tune the composition. We can modify the plasma so that you get different species composition. We are working with some agencies here around Ahmedabad and so on for low cost disinfection of food related containers. So instead of using complicated things where if you're handling food and so on, you need to sterilize those containers. We are finding that using low amounts of this plasma activated water could be used in sterilization and resulting in net saving. There'll be a net financial saving to those people. I'm not at liberty to reveal the name of that agency or the saving they're getting, but at low scale, it has worked very well. The same plasma activated water has been studied by some of our agriculture industry collaborators. We are working with some agriculture universities, Solan Agriculture University, Anand, and so on. They found that if you have seeds and you put them in plasma activated water for a certain amount of time, it tends to enhance the rate of germination of the seeds. Number one, basically what it does, it modifies the surface properties of the seeds. So the seeds start taking up water faster. Because of that, the seeds germinate faster. The amount of chlorophyll you get, the total growth of the shoot and so on, all that becomes faster. Now, finally, of course, somebody has to study whether there are any harmful effects being produced by this. That is currently being examined. And many of these things are being done through BRN's projects. We have collaborators in different sectors. So similarly, you have antimicrobial, you know that catheters in hospitals, they can themselves become sites for growth of bacteria. So a patient could go in with one problem and come out because of the catheter could come out with some other infection. You can have plasma treatment of these things with no chemicals used, which can reduce the extent to which bacteria tend to grow on catheters. So this is one thing that we are working on, again with the Medical Research Center. Something that is at the proposal stage, and that has come only recently. Recently, you might remember the Prime Minister gave a call for production of green hydrogen using different technologies. Now, we've already demonstrated the process of plasma gasification of paper, plastic, and petroleum waste. This is established. Now, these things end up giving you a high percent of hydrogen, 45% hydrogen, 40% carbon monoxide, depending on the amount of oxygen you feed and so on. You would, of course, need some soot particle filters, HEPA filters, and so on. So you end up with a different percentages of hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and so on. Using some techniques like PSA or proton exchange membranes or different techniques, you would need to separate out the hydrogen. So what we are doing is right now trying to look for collaborators like NCL in Pune, who could help us in the second part. That is, we'll be able to produce using this waste like Bakelite or something else. We could produce hydrogen and CO. Then we need a collaborator who has expertise in separating out the hydrogen from these things. And even the carbon monoxide can be turned into carbon black, which itself will be useful. There's another way you can produce hydrogen in an eco-friendly way using something called plasma electrolysis. Now, there's some companies which are claiming, we haven't done it at this stage yet, it's just an idea so far. They are claiming that the plasma electrolysis will cut the cost of green hydrogen by a factor of 3. So that looks very encouraging. We're trying to see if we can do it. Again, in this, we'll be working with one of the CSIR labs. Lastly, I'll come to plasma applications in aerospace and defense, because many people are not aware of this thing. We've done already a lot of projects for ISRO related to plasma thrusters, a space plasma interaction experiment for solar panel lifetime, and so on. Let me now come to things we are developing in IPR itself. And this is something where we feel there's a potential for DAE itself to get involved in a bigger way. We are developing what is called a Helicon plasma thruster. We have made it, we designed it, fabricated, operated. And this is all based on our science, because we had earlier PhD students who had examined the physics of such plasmas. Using a 13.56 megahertz standard source, 5 kilowatts, we have made our own sensors, thrust measurement sensors using strain gauges. We have already got thrusts of around 70 to 80 millinewtons. Now, remember, these thrusters are basically meant for small orbital changes in satellites once the satellite is already in orbit. So you might want to change the attitude of the satellite, you might want to make small orbital changes, and so on. Typically, the thrust in these plasma thrusters, which are made around the world, is in the range of up to 100 millinewtons. So we are pretty close to getting there already. We had our DPR, we are targeted 100. We've already achieved more than 90 there. And we are developing a double the power system right now. I'll just show you a video of one of these. You'll see as we increase the power, the RF power to the thruster, this is the plasma coming out in the thruster. This is all inside a vacuum, because in space there'll be a vacuum. We have a test facility which tests the whole thing inside a vacuum. Now, so this is just some pictures of those facilities. We have a strain gauge sensor developed for this thing and so on. The future plan, in fact, the immediate plan, is if we can increase the power of the RF from 5 kilowatts to 20 to 25 kilowatts and follow that by something called ion cyclotron heating at about 100 kilowatts, the thrust can be taken from millinewtons to a few newtons. This has already been done. So a few newtons, that is 1 to 5 newtons. So what are we proposing? This is something we're in the process. We just discussed this a few days back, and we are thinking of putting up a formal proposal to DAE. If you look at this table, it shows multiple projects in different countries. There's Europe, EU plus Russia, US, the Chinese, of course, also. The idea is for deep space missions. Currently, you cannot have deep space missions which are continuously powered using chemical rockets, because chemical rockets are very inefficient. They need, because the speed of efflux of the gases which are coming out is pretty low. So they need a lot of mass to be carried. And that mass has to be put up in space in the first place, which costs money. Using plasma thrusters, deep space missions would be much more successful. Now, to power those plasma thrusters, all these projects are proposing the use of nuclear reactors, small nuclear reactors. So there are lots of design studies that have been done, lots of experimental development that's been done. This table, of course, gives the details of that. Much of this work is published. What are we proposing? We are proposing that the current thruster we are doing, that is based on a concept called Vasimir. It's a Helicon plasma, it's electrode-less, so it doesn't get worn out. It has a very high specific impulse, which is a very key parameter for plasma thrusters. We can get plasma exhaust velocities up to 50 kilometers per second. And we are proposing, like others, this is based on a design that's already there, a nuclear reactor, which would give a net power of about 1 megawatt electric. A reactor coolant would be lithium. The reactor materials would be the uranium nitride, combined with niobium and 1% zirconium. There's the details of that. So this, again, the development of a reactor like this would have to be done at BIRC. What IPR would work on is the plasma thruster, giving a few newtons, something like 1 to 5 newtons. So this is something that we are just preparing a proposal for, and we'll be putting up to DAE shortly. Another application where we are working, this is on a small scale. This is for reducing the drag on automobiles, making automobiles more efficient in terms of fuel efficiency by using plasma discharges. Now, you know that 65% of the engine power in a truck, for example, goes in overcoming air drag. That drag can be reduced. If you can reduce that form drag, you can reduce the fuel efficiency. That aerodynamic drag reduction can be done using plasmas. There are already patents on this from Honda and GM, for example. If you have a very small part of a car, maybe the rear of the car where you put these things, it can modify the airflow, and that reduces the drag. What have we done in IPR? People have done these studies. The top two figures show what actually happens when you have a plasma. You see the cross section, you see an airfoil, that's the red shape, and you see streamlines, those are the white colors. If you don't have a plasma, and at a particular angle of attack, the streamlines tend to separate from the airfoil, so you get a very large drag. If you set up a plasma, have a plasma discharge there, the streamlines tend to get attached, which is good. It reduces the drag. At IPR, we've set up a small experiment with a small wind tunnel, and we've done early studies on this thing. This is a video of the study. This is a standard NACA airfoil, a particular shape. You can visualize, you can see the white streamlines, which are visualized using smoke, which is injected. Now you'll see when there's a violet glow here, out here, which means the plasma is on, the flow gets attached. The streamlines come close to the surface, and the drag therefore will reduce. When you turn off the plasma, when the violet glow goes, see the airflow goes away. So we have now demonstrated that this thing works. Now we are making load cells and so on to measure the drag reduction. This has already gone to BRNS. We are trying to make it a coordinated research project with other agencies to test this out professionally. We've also made things like plasma antennas, which can be stealth antennas. I won't go into detail because I think I'm running out of time. We're also making, because IPR has now strengths in high current power supplies and magnets as part of the fusion effort. So we are trying to develop a small scale electromagnetic aircraft launch system, which is something of interest to the Navy. We have a project sanctioned by DAE for a small scale prototype of this thing. Just show you a video of that. A small scale, this is a small scale system. Once it works, we'll go for a bigger thing. So this is electromagnetic launch. The idea is to replace on aircraft carriers, you do aircraft launch using hydraulically driven, steam driven systems that could be replaced by these. Now to back up all this work, we have computing, a lot of computing going on at IPR. We've got a 1 petaflop computing facility, which does we do various kinds of simulations, like simulations for tokamaks, for MHD, and so on. For the plasma pyrolysis plant that I showed, we do CFD analysis for that. We are doing artificial intelligence development, working with ICMR on a particular thing for TB detection and so on. Okay. So now finally, what's the future? We are now working out a proposal for a national program, which could possibly be organized as a government industry consortium. It would be a 3-pronged program. The first would be indigenous development of all fusion technologies. The second is 2 tokamaks, which would be intermediate steps to a fusion power reactor. The first would be a fusion neutron source using copper magnets, pulsed operation, and maybe used for production of some isotopes. And the second would be a superconducting tokamak, somewhat smaller than ITER. In parallel, develop societal technologies. We want India to become the global hub for development and commercial deployment of all the plasma technologies I've talked about. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Oh, that was great, Shashank. You said
Thanks.
you covered the whole world, I think.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Malhotra ji, you can take over. I think there were some questions. Yeah, there is a question from Sanjay Saxena. He wants to know, my question is, can reactive species of plasma activated water can be used for cancer treatment also?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I mentioned that we are working with the AIIMS, the Department of Neurology, and we also working with ACTREC, precisely in that area. So with ACTREC, already studies have been done. We've reached the in vivo trials also. They've been done on 5 sets of 5 hamsters. This is for oral cancers. So far, it seems to be showing that it is not, those reactive radicals are not harming healthy cells. and they are harming the cancerous cells. In the case of AIIMS, Department of Neurology, their interest is when they do brain surgery, because their particular interest is in epilepsy, which is caused by brain tumors. Now they do surgery to remove the hotspot in the brain that triggers the epileptic attacks. The problem is, after they clean that, if there are some cells left behind, then it propagates very fast. So there they are trying to see, there we are at the stage of in vitro trials, trying to see if this can kill the cancerous cells. Early results are encouraging, but we still have to reach further. So in the case of ATRAC, it has gone further.
Okay. Yeah, there is, there is one more question. Can we get some details of green H2 by plasma electrolysis?
Yeah. I'll have to, shall I go back to my presentation? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, because I skipped over that part because I was taking too much time. Just 1 second. Yeah. Yeah. Basically, what seems to be happening is they are actually even in using plasma electrolysis, there are two different systems. One is you have a plasma electrode, which is created as a discharge between the water and the real electrode, which is slightly above the surface. I don't have the details here. That is in a separate presentation, so maybe I can send you the details.
Okay.
Basically, what seems to happen is it increases the production of hydrogen by forming hydrogen radicals and hydroxide radicals. Because in producing plasma, it increases the electron attack on the hydroxyl ions and H+, which leads to excited OH star and H star. That leads to, and the normal problem that you have in electrolysis is that you have those bubbles forming at the electrode. That doesn't happen here because the real creation inside a plasma, the hydrogen is very mobile. So it comes out much more easily. In a normal electrolyzer, it would tend to accumulate at the electrode, and getting it out is a problem. That becomes much less of a problem here, and therefore more production. If you like, I can send you more details on this thing.
Yeah, I think just a minute. Mr. Rajan Varshne, is it okay? Or you want to ask more?
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking up this question. In this, what is exactly being done to get this cost lower? Like it is written, it can bring down the cost.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I mentioned this is still at the proposal stage. The first one, you see, I talked about two things for green hydrogen. This
right.
First method is known because we have done all this, a lot of it. We just need somebody to separate out the hydrogen from the carbon monoxide. This one is still at the proposal stage. This came up because NCL has some capability. So we found that it can be done. Companies are claiming, and there's a publication also in Journal of Physics. But there's not something we have done yet. So
just the previous slide which you were showing.
Yeah.
Yeah. In this, you are saying separation of hydrogen. This is, can you explain a bit? Would it reduce the cost of membranes or use of these costly rare earths? Would it help?
The basic point that we are contributing is the separation part would have to be handled by NCL, by somebody who has domain expertise in that area. What we are saying is that almost any kind of waste, for example, they said a major issue right now is bakelite, any thermosetting polymer, which you just have to dispose of. So any bakelite or petroleum waste or solvent, we can turn it into syngas.
Hello, can you mute yourself, please?
Right. So what we can do from the plasma point of view is we'll turn it into a hydrogen and a CO mixture. Beyond that, I'm not able to comment because that part would have to be done by the domain expert in the separation area. We are not experts in that area.
And in this, any cost or commercial details you have? Has it been implemented somewhere?
This one, yes. There are companies which are doing it. Again, I can share details with you.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, because here I was covering a very wide scope, so I didn't want to go into detail. But if you can send me your mail ID, I'll mail it to you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Very nice. Any more questions, please? Dr. Grover has put one question. More details for green hydrogen will be welcome.
Yes.
So you can send it to him, or you want to explain
Yeah, sure.
something? Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
Send that. Yeah, because I've got a separate presentation, but I'll have to go into that end.
Yeah. I think you can share with him
Yes,
directly. Yeah, sure.
It's okay. We'll talk it separately.
Okay. Okay.
But this is a very important, very interesting development which he has shared.
Yes.
In fact, there's a third area which I didn't mention. That is, we found that where we are talking to CGCRI, Calcutta, that is, there's some electrolytes, solid electrolytes, where plasma treatment can improve the performance of the electrolyte. Again, remember, we are not experts on the electrolyte part, but we can do that plasma treatment. We've done enough of that. So we are talking to CGCRI for that. We're, in fact, right now we've just prepared a DPR listing our own part of the work, and we put it up to our governing council just 2 days back. So now we are going to approach CSNCL and CGCRI to see if they can take up the second part. Then we are planning to put up these proposals to MNRE for funding.
I have a question, Dr. Damarao. I have a question. I have put up a question there. Hello.
Yes, madam.
Oh, yeah. Can I ask the question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. My question is, it's an excellent talk. I was very much impressed to listen to the different activities of Plasma Center. My question is, you are making nanoparticles by this top-down approach, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question. Could you repeat, please?
You are making nanoparticles by top-down approaches, especially by plasma technology. So will there be a problem, especially you are making in kg quantities?
Yes.
So if that is so, will there be a problem of polydispersity of the nanoparticles? You may end up.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yes.
So then how do you control its applications or use it for any special applications? Because you need monodisperse nanoparticles, isn't it, for many applications?
For some, yes, but there are other things where the nanoparticle itself, like zinc oxide or titanium, these are already being sold. In fact, we've transferred technology to a party.
But they are of micron size you are making?
No, I'm sorry?
You are making them of micron size or nano size?
Nanoparticles, yeah.
Okay, so in what size generally there?
Well, I don't have the details right now. I can get back to you.
Okay, thank you so much.
If you can share your email with me, I can send you that separately.
Yeah, you can. I will send email to you.
Maybe in the chat you can put it there or something.
No, I will directly communicate to you.
Sure.
Yeah. If there are no more questions, let us thank Professor Shashank Chaturvedi for an excellent talk on the various activities of IPR. He touched upon almost everything under the sky, covering from the tokamak down to the societal applications, various industrial applications, and so on and so forth. So, sir, we thank you very much for an enlightened speech by you, and we hope to get you more on our webinar platform. So, as a vote of thanks, I would thank all the EC members for participating in this webinar today. And I should particularly thank our treasurer, Mr. Mittal, who has been very kind enough to distribute and circulate the notification to all the members. And I hope they are all benefited by this excellent talk by Dr. Shashank. And we have our BRC person, Mr. Shimjit Rajgopal, who has been making the posters for us, and we deeply thank him. And I should also mention here that our next webinar is on 8th January, again a Saturday. This is the 13th webinar. We are inviting Professor Jayaraman Srinivasan, Emeritus Professor, Devecha Center for Climate Change, IISc campus. So he is going to talk on the science of climate change. I request all the EC members and INS members to join the webinar on 8th January. So thanking Professor Shashank, thank you very much. We had a wonderful time with you, and the kind of excellent presentation that you made has really overwhelmed our knowledge base, and I'm sure many people will directly be in touch with you and get their clarifications. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for being connected through the Zoom meeting. Thank you. Mehta sir, shall I close? Thank you, Shashank. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.